Imagine waking up in a world where you're not the only kind of human. You step outside your stone-walled home, the cold morning air biting at your cheeks in the distance. You see your neighbor broad-shouldered, thick-browed, silent but alert. He's not human in the way you are, he's a Neanderthal. And in this world he's the dominant species, not you now. Pause. Take that image in, because this isn't a science fiction flick. This is the alternate version of our history that almost happened. Let's rewind the clock roughly 40,000 years ago. Earth was home to more than just us, the Homo sapiens, wandering through the same forests, hunting the same prey, and carving their lives out of stone and fire. Neanderthals were our evolutionary cousins, stronger, stockier, built for survival in brutal cold. These weren't caveman cartoons. They were smart, skilled, and had bigger brains than us. We didn't just see them from afar either. We met them, lived with them, slept with them, and then they vanished just like that, poof, gone. No one knows exactly why. Maybe it was disease. Maybe it was war. Maybe the ice rolled in harder than they could handle. Or maybe we just outnumbered them, outlasted them. But what if they hadn't disappeared? What if in some twisted flip of fate we were the ones who vanished, and they were the ones who inherited the earth? That's the question we're going to chase across this entire story. Not just what could have happened, but how different everything would be if Neanderthals had been the ones to win. Would they build cities? Would they invent the internet? Would you be here? Would I? Or would the world be carved into tribal wilderness run by instinct, physical power, and a totally different kind of intelligence? Because here's the truth no one really talks about. Neanderthals weren't dumb. They weren't failed humans. They were different, wired for survival in ways we still don't fully understand, and they came this close to beating us. This isn't just a what-if story. It's a peek into a parallel reality, a world where intelligence didn't look like smartphones and skyscrapers, but like raw strength, deep tribal bonds, and a lifestyle in harmony with nature instead of dominance over it. And that world might have been quieter, stronger, maybe even better. So buckle in, this isn't history. This is a time machine. And in this timeline, Neanderthals didn't die off. We did. Let's get one thing straight. We didn't just coexist. With Neanderthals, we feared them. They weren't legends in the forest. They were real, breathing, bleeding, watching, and when you crossed paths with one, you knew. They moved different, thought different. You could feel it in your bones. This wasn't a fellow human. This was something else. You see, Neanderthals didn't walk around like us, head in the clouds. They were grounded, heavy, present. Everything about them screamed survivor. Their eyes didn't just see you, they scanned you, calculated you like a predator, wondering if you were worth the risk. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. And that silence, it wasn't dumb. It was deliberate. They studied storms, tracked beasts across frozen plains. With no compass, knew when the earth would shift just by the way the birds flew. We ran on curiosity. They ran on instinct. We built to expand. They built to endure. And when food got scarce, when winter slammed down like a fist, they didn't panic. They adapted. That's what scared us most. They weren't just stronger. They were steadier. Where we stumbled through chaos, chasing fire and invention, they found peace in repetition, in rhythm, in tribe. You lost someone in our kind, you mourned. They lost someone, they gathered. They held on to bones, flowers, symbols. They remembered their dead not as loss but as legacy. And when we stared across the river at them, we didn't just see muscles. We saw a version of ourselves that didn't need progress to survive. That shook us, because deep down we knew if the world didn't bend to us, they would have outlasted us. Every fire we sparked was just noise to them. Every tool we made was just delay, because they were built for forever. We were built to move. They were built to stay. So what if just once they got tired of watching? What if they pushed back? What if one Neanderthal tribe decided to stop retreating and started conquering? Would we have stood a chance? That's the chilling part. We'll never know. But this story, this alternate timeline, it doesn't ask if they could have won. It assumes they did. And now we get to feel what that would have meant. Not through theories, not through science, through their eyes. Welcome to the world they inherited. Let's rewind to a moment that changed everything. A time when two kinds of humans stared each other down across the firelight. It wasn't just a brief encounter. It was an overlap, a clash of instincts. Two species, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, coexisting in the same forests, hunting the same prey, building the same fires. But make no mistake, this wasn't peaceful. This was tension wrapped in survival. Neanderthals weren't just curious creatures lurking in caves. They were apex predators in their own right. Imagine walking through the woods and hearing heavy footfalls behind you. Not a bear, not a wolf, a Neanderthal patrol. Broad-shouldered, thick skulls, fire wielders, bone breakers. They didn't speak the way we did. But their eyes said everything. Territory, survival, dominance. You knew they were watching. And they knew you didn't belong. Here's the twist most people miss. They weren't mindless brutes. They had culture, art, rituals they buried their dead with. Flowers, crafted tools that could slice through bone. Made necklaces out of eagle talons. They weren't just brawn. They were brains wrapped in a survivalist's body. But here's the haunting part, we didn't just see them, we mingled with them. Some of us fought, some of us loved, some of us betrayed. Imagine a small tribe of Homo sapiens, camped at the edge of a cliffside. Their fires flicker low, food's running out, tensions are high. And just across the ravine, Neanderthals sit silently. Watching. Do they attack? Do they offer food? Do they wait for us to make the wrong move? These encounters shaped the fate of both species, and every moment, every decision was a roll of the evolutionary dice. Now imagine if one of those dice landed the other way, if one Neanderthal chief decided not to show mercy, if one sapien tribe never crossed the Alps, if they outbred us first. One small shift and this story wouldn't be told in our voice. Here's what most forget, we didn't beat them by being stronger, we beat them by being more connected, more cooperative, more curious, maybe more ruthless. But what if that wasn't enough? What if the fires we built in those woods weren't the beginning of civilization, but the last sparks of a species on the brink? What if we weren't the survivors, but the lucky ones, and luck always runs out? Close your eyes. Now imagine thinking without words. You don't have an inner monologue, no constant voice in your head, narrating your life. No sentences forming ideas, just raw instant emotion sensation. That's the mind of a Neanderthal, not broken, not inferior, just different. And maybe that difference was the key to everything. See, Neanderthals didn't process the world like we do. They didn't build empires from abstract dreams. They built survival from stone, blood, and memory. They lived in intense, present-focused reality. The cold, they felt it like bone-deep truth. The hunt. It wasn't sport. It was survival theater. And love, oh, it was real, fierce, protective, but without poetry, you couldn't win them with words. You had to show them. Picture a Neanderthal mother sitting in the dark holding her child close as the wind howls through the cave. Her mind isn't racing with what if, she's calculating. Can I protect this child tonight? Is the fire big enough? Are there wolves nearby? Every decision is life or death. Every heartbeat matters. And you know what? That kind of thinking doesn't need language. It needs presence, awareness, an intelligence tuned to the physical, not the philosophical. Their brains were bigger than ours, but they were wired for space, not speech. Give a Homo sapien a stick, he'll imagine a flagpole. Give a Neanderthal a stick, he'll sharpen it into a spear. That's not a lack of creativity, that's focused purpose. And it made them terrifyingly efficient. They could read terrain like maps, smell rain before it fell, hear danger before it whispered in a world where you couldn't afford to be wrong. Neanderthals didn't guess, they knew. But here's where things get complicated. What they gained in instinct, they lacked in abstraction. They didn't dream about gods in the sky. They didn't design mythologies or build symbols to explain the stars. To them, the world didn't need explaining, it just needed surviving. So while we sat around fires telling stories of monsters and afterlives, Neanderthal, your heart punches your ribs because everything about him feels off, not wrong but unfamiliar. His face brutally honest, no smirk, no fake smile, no masks, just eyes that say, I see you. It's not a war, not yet, but it's a collision, two different species, two different worlds, one shared Earth, and in that moment, silence, no weapons, just breathing, heavy, real. Here's the truth. When Homo sapiens first crossed paths with Neanderthals, it wasn't instantly violent, it was curiosity, hesitation. A slow dance of discovery. We didn't immediately go for the kill. In fact, we probably traded shared space, even learn and imagine. Them watching us use fire differently, make sharper tools, paint on cave walls like weird little artists. Maybe they thought we were soft, delicate bones, narrow frames always talking. And maybe we thought they were beasts, silent, unreadable, too big for their own good. But neither side was fully right or wrong. It was messy. We were learning them. They were watching us. And beneath that awkward coexistence, a dangerous question bubbled up. Who belongs here more? That's when things started to crack, resources tightened, territories overlapped, and patience wore thin. Neanderthals were built for dominance, bodies made for crushing cold and close combat. But we had tactics, coordination, and this weird new thing called strategy. We planned ambush, we moved in coordinated packs, we communicated across distances. To them it was chaos, to us progress. The encounters turned into skirmishes. Skirmishes turned into war. It wasn't one giant battle. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. One tribe outmaneuvered, one hunting ground lost, one child gone missing in the night. Slowly, like the tide, we pushed them back. But here's what no one tells you. It wasn't all blood, because somehow, somewhere in the middle of the fear, we mixed, literally, our DNA today. It still carries fragments of them. That means some Homo sapien looked at a Neanderthal and didn't see a monster. He saw a partner, a mate, maybe even love. How wild is that? Two species on the brink of war, and still connection found a way. So, now picture this again. You holding hands with someone thicker boned, broader faced, quieter than you'll ever be. Not despite the difference, because of it. That's what happened, and it's one of the greatest plot twists in human history. Because in the very act of surviving, we also blended. We didn't just fight them, we became them, at least a little. So as we march forward in this alternate story where they didn't vanish, maybe the question isn't how they beat us. Maybe it's how we were always meant to become something together. One species, one Earth, one shared fate. Let's drop the modern ego for a second. Forget smartphones, space travel, social media, and all the noise we wrap around our species like armor. Now look into the eyes of a Neanderthal. What do you see? Most people think primitive, but that's not what was really going on in there. Their brains bigger than ours, literally more volume, more density, but not built for the same kind of thinking. We think fast. They thought deep while we were gossiping and building tribes through language. They were watching, processing, reading every twitch of a muscle, every rustle in the wind. They didn't rely on small talk. They felt their surroundings. Where we sought to conquer nature, they moved with it. Their intelligence wasn't made for cities and politics. It was built for survival, for silence, for sensing things we've long forgotten how to feel. Imagine this: a blizzard's rolling in. You're not tracking it with a forecast. You're tracking it through cloud formations, shifts, and bird calls. The way your own breath feels colder when it hits your teeth. That was the Neanderthal mind, hyper, tuned to the earth, of walking antenna of instincts, sharpened by brutal necessity. They weren't loud, they didn't need to be. They didn't fill caves with endless chatter, but they buried their dead, with care. With flowers, they didn't build pyramids, but they carved tools with frightening precision. Perfectly balanced, beautifully efficient. And when they hunted, it was personal. Not some distant sniper shot from safety. It was up close, spears, hands, risk. Every kill a fight for life or death. And after the hunt, they shared. They bonded. Their groups were small, tight, loyal. They didn't have kings or celebrities, but they knew each other. Every face mattered. That's a different kind of genius, the kind rooted in connection, not ambition. Now, let's talk emotion. Think they didn't feel love, grief, joy. Neanderthals cared for the injured. They protected the weak. They sat beside the dying. That kind of behavior doesn't come from brute instinct. Comes from feeling deep, real soul-level empathy. So if they'd inherited the Earth. We wouldn't be living in glass towers staring at screens. We'd be grounded, present, plugged into a world we actually notice. Their societies wouldn't revolve around status or fame. They'd revolve around survival, respect, and the tribe. No endless scrolling, no overthinking every word, just truth, spoken through action. That kind of world, it might have been quieter, but it would have been honest. The Neanderthal mind wasn't less, it was just different, more tuned to what is not what could be, and maybe, just maybe, that's not a downgrade. Maybe in some twisted alternate timeline, we're the ones who lost something valuable, something primal. Something we traded away for convenience and control, because the Neanderthal mind didn't chase power, it chased presence, and in a world ruled by them, you wouldn't just be living. You'd be aware every step, every breath, every heartbeat aligned. With the earth beneath your feet, you wouldn't just think. You'd feel the world thinking back. Let's kill a modern myth real quick. We think Neanderthals were loners wandering caves, grunting, scowling, club in hand. No real sense of community. Trash that image, it's wrong, way off. The truth, Neanderthals were tribal to the bone. Family first, group always, loyalty forever. You didn't network. You bonded not over status, not over wealth, but survival. You hunted together, ate together, froze together, fought for each other without hesitation, and that created a bond modern humans barely understand anymore. Because in their world, one weak link didn't mean embarrassment, it meant death. So when someone got hurt, they didn't get left behind. They got carried. Evidence shows Neanderthals cared for the elderly and injured, fed them, cleaned them, sat with them. Why? Because in a tribe that small, everyone mattered. There was no extra, no one to throw away. And here's the part that'll hit you. They didn't do it for reward. They did it because it was right, built into the code of who they were. See, we built civilizations by scaling outwards. Laws, systems, governments, but they built theirs by scaling inward. Tighter, closer, deeper. No police, no politicians, just unspoken laws of the tribe. You pull your weight, you protect the group, you don't lie. You don't leave, because if you do, you're not just betraying the person, you're betraying the tribe. That was the ultimate sin. Now imagine growing up in that. No career ladder, no likes on your posts, but your place in the group. That was everything. You were watched, not judged but known, every strength noted, every weakness covered. You could be slow but wise, quiet but deadly, small but brave, and your tribe wouldn't mock that. They'd count on it. This was social structure without ego. No fake smiles, no power games, just raw, honest value. And that shaped how they saw each other, not as competition, but as extensions of the same body. You feel pain, we feel pain. You eat, we eat. You fall, we lift you. Sounds idealistic, maybe, but bones don't lie, and the fossils we found show injuries that would have been fatal if not treated by others who had nothing to gain. So what would our world look like if Neanderthals ruled it? Fewer cities, more camps, tighter circles, less fame, more respect. The goal wouldn't be to go viral, it'd be the valued. Status wouldn't come from your wealth, it'd come from your word. Loyalty wouldn't be a buzzword, it'd be your lifeline. We'd raise children to serve the group, not just themselves. We'd grieve losses like a body losing a limb, and we'd measure life not in years, but in impact. You wouldn't just exist, you'd belong. And in that belonging, you'd find something rarer than progress, peace. So yeah, Neanderthals may not have built empires, but they built something stronger. They built tribes that lasted, and in a world ruled by them, maybe we wouldn't need laws to keep us human. We'd already be living it. Let's get something straight. Neanderthals weren't just stronger, they were built differently upstairs too. Not in a less smart kind of way. In a different smart kind of way. See, for years we thought Homo sapiens outlasted Neanderthals because we were smarter. But here's the twist no one talks about: they had bigger brains than us. Yeah, bigger, not just slightly noticeably, but those brains weren't wired for writing poetry or coding apps. They were built for raw survival, for sensing danger, for navigating harsh terrains, for remembering every single crack in the ice, every animal trail, every shift in the wind. Think about that they could walk through a frozen forest and know, without a map, without a word, exactly where to go, where the prey slept, where the water hid, where safety lived. That's not primitive. That's instinct at genius levels. They didn't need books. Their world was the textbook, and when it came to emotion, they weren't robots, far from it. Skulls show signs of injury, healed bones, evidence of care, which means they felt deeply compassion, loyalty, sorrow. You don't nurse your wounded back to health unless you care. You don't bury your dead with flowers unless you mourn. So no, they weren't brutes. They were beasts with hearts. And that combination terrifyingly powerful, because you weren't just facing the strong body, you were facing a mind that remembered, noticed, reacted, and cared. Now ask yourself, what kind of world would we have today if that kind of intelligence ruled? Less data, more instinct, less theory, more feeling. We'd read each other's body language like a second language. We'd listen without words. We'd know when someone was struggling, without needing them to say it, because that's the kind of mental software. Neanderthals ran on sensory-driven, emotionally sharp, wildly aware. It wasn't about imagination. It was about immediacy. And in a world like that, you don't need endless planning. You need presence. You need to see what's real, right here, right now. That's the kind of thinking that doesn't create skyscrapers. It creates survivors. It doesn't make space stations. It makes homes that last, and maybe, just maybe, it creates souls that feel deeper than ours ever dared to. So when we say, what if Neanderthals had won? We're not just talking about who'd be in charge. We're talking about how we'd even think. And maybe, just maybe, our minds would be stronger, simpler, but far more alive. Forget preschool. Forget lullabies and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. If you were born a Neanderthal, your first memory might be the smell of blood, the crunch of snow, the low hum of your father's breathing beside the fire-thick, warm animal. Because in that world, childhood wasn't soft, it was sacred, and it was tough. No baby talk, no plastic toys. You didn't learn through cartoons or classrooms. You learned through watching, imitating, surviving. You saw your mother shape stone into a blade, so you copied her hand. You watched your father gut a beast with bare strength, so you studied the movement, the calm focus. There were no lessons. Life was the lesson, and if you didn't learn, you didn't make it. But here's the kicker. It wasn't cold or cruel. It was community. A Neanderthal child wasn't raised by two parents. They were raised by a tribe. Every adult was a guide, every elder a walking story, every sibling a mentor in mud and muscle. They shared the hunt, shared the pain, shared the warmth of victory and the silence of death. And from the very start, a child felt it. You are part of something bigger, not a family of force. And here's where things get wild. Their development, way faster than ours. Bones and skulls show Neanderthal children grew up quicker. They didn't stay kids for long. By age 4 or 5, you were already learning the rhythms of survival. By 10, you were in it. Tracking, carving, understanding the land the way we understand GPS. Except they felt it in their bones. No iPads, just instinct. But don't mistake all this for brutality. Neanderthals had emotion, and they passed it down early. Grief, joy, protectiveness, so fierce it's written in fossilized injuries. Grown men throwing themselves between children and danger. They didn't raise warriors, they raised guardians, and maybe that's what made their kids different. Not just strong but grounded, not just tough but connected. To the earth, to their people, to themselves. Now picture that world today. Imagine if every child grew up knowing their value wasn't in what grades they got, but in how well they protected their tribe. Imagine if our kids learned not just how to think, but when to feel. Not how to compete, but how to belong. Imagine a world where childhood wasn't about innocence lost. It was about strength earned, because that's what it meant to be young in a Neanderthal world. You didn't wait to matter, you already did. Let's talk about something we all crave. Connection. Not swipes, not texts, not red hearts on a glowing screen. We're talking primal, wordless, soul deep love, the kind Neanderthals knew better than us. Because in their world, love wasn't a luxury, it was survival. When every day meant freezing winds, stalking predators, and empty stomachs. Love wasn't about candlelight and flowers, it was about trust. Loyalty and choosing someone who'd bleed beside you if things went south. Picture two Neanderthals by a fire. They don't talk much, language wasn't their strength. But he knows she's in pain by the twitch of her eye. She knows he's scared. By how he grips his spear, that was love. No need for sweet nothings. Just presence, a kind of emotional x-ray. They felt each other. And the fire that was sacred, the literal heart of the home. They built it together, fed it together, slept by it facing each other, not on opposite ends of a bed, but curled close, body to body, soul to soul. Now let's get honest, Neanderthal relationships were different from ours. Yes, there was sex, yes, there were bonds, but here's the real kicker, they mated for life. Not always, but often, and when they chose each other, it wasn't a game. It wasn't about status or aesthetics or swiping left because of someone's weird shoes. It was raw, instinctive, and deeply committed. They raised children together. They protected each other in hunts. They grieved each other with real visible pain. Buried their dead with care. Sometimes with flowers, sometimes with tools, always with meaning. That means something, because grief doesn't come unless there was love, and fossils show us that love existed, time and time again. One Neanderthal was found with injuries that would have left him helpless. He couldn't hunt, couldn't feed himself, but he lived. Why? Because someone fed him, protected him. But here's the real kicker, they mated for life. Not always, but often, and when they chose each other, it wasn't a game. It wasn't about status or aesthetics or swiping left because of someone's weird shoes. It was raw, instinctive, and deeply committed. They raised children together. They protected each other in hunts. They grieved each other with real visible pain. Buried their dead with care. Sometimes with flowers, sometimes with tools, always with meaning. That means something, because grief doesn't come unless there was love, and fossils show us that love existed. Time and time again, one Neanderthal was found with injuries that would have left him helpless. He couldn't hunt, couldn't feed himself, but he lived. Why? Because someone fed him, protected him, loved him enough to carry his weight literally and emotionally. Tell me that's not love. Tell me that's not more real than half the things we call relationships today. See, their world didn't need wedding rings or anniversary posts. It needed partnership. Two people facing the wild together, knowing the other would never walk away when things got hard. That's the kind of love that makes legends. Not cute stories, not rom-coms, but tribal epics whispered around fires for generations. So yeah, Neanderthals might have grunted more than they spoke. They might not have read poetry or written love letters, but their bonds, they were stronger than bone, hotter than fire, and deeper than anything we've felt through screens. Maybe we didn't outlast them because we were smarter. Maybe we just forgot how to love like that. Forget kings, forget crowns, forget the boardroom suits and alpha egos. Neanderthals weren't built for hierarchy, they were built for tribes, and in their world, power didn't sit on a throne, it moved fluid, shared, earned. Let's paint the picture. A group of 25, that's your average Neanderthal tribe. Not a nation, not even a village, just a tightly knit, fiercely bonded group. Huddled against the cold. You didn't rise through politics. You rose through respect, through survival, through action. You saved a kid from a wolf. You didn't brag. But people noticed. They trusted you more. You brought back food after a brutal hunt. Didn't matter if you were young, old, male, female. You earned your place. Status wasn't inherited. It was lived. There were no official leaders shouting commands. It was more like a rhythm. Whoever had the skill for the moment stepped forward. When it was time to track game, the best hunter led. When someone got sick, the healer took the lead. That's what real leadership looks like. Situational, adaptive, shared. Now compare that to us. We chase titles, we follow job descriptions and LinkedIn bios. But Neanderthals, they followed competence. And here's the best part, decisions were collective. They sat around fires, no microphones, no agendas, just a circle. Everyone heard, everyone spoke, even the quiet ones had weight. It wasn't democracy. It wasn't dictatorship, it was tribal wisdom, because when survival is on the line, ego gets kicked to the snow. That's something we've lost. We build systems that worship individualism. They built communities that leaned into interdependence. Everyone mattered, the elder who remembered where food grew in drought, the child who noticed the herd moving, the mother who felt the storm in her bones, and they protected each other. Not just physically but emotionally. You see, fossil records tell stories of Neanderthals who were cared for long after they stopped being useful. Blind ones, crippled ones, they weren't abandoned. They were held, fed, loved. Which means their tribes didn't just function. They thrived because they understood something we often forget. The strength of the tribe is the strength of everyone in it. It wasn't about climbing over each other. It was about lifting each other in conflict. Of course it existed, but it wasn't settled by blood and dominance. It was handled in circles, in silence, in shared space. Neanderthals didn't need jails. Their accountability came from the eyes of people who mattered. You don't betray someone you take a spear for. So imagine a world like that. No presidents, no billionaires, no corporate ladders, just groups of humans strong, bonded, built on mutual trust and action over talk. A tribe not perfect, not utopia, but real, and maybe better. Wake up, the air's cold, your fur-lined blanket stitched. Together with sinew and patience, barely holds the night's chill at bay. The fire's burned low. Smoke curls lazily around the stone walls. Outside the forest hums. You rise not to a schedule, not to an alarm, but to instinct, to the rhythm of the tribe. Your first glance is at your people. Some still sleeping, others already stirring. The old man who remembers every migration path. The child chewing a root for breakfast. The woman reshaping a spearhead with sharp precision. You nod, no need for words. Everything here is understood. Food is first. You're hungry, always, but Neanderthals don't just run out solo with a spear, like some action movie. It's a coordinated hunt. 3 of you go out, 1 tracks, 1 flushes, 1 waits. It's not sport, it's survival. And it's brutal. You move through the brush, silent, sharp-eyed. Every footprint, every snapped twig tells a story. And when the prey falls, an elk, maybe you don't cheer. You kneel, you thank the beast, because you know what this cost. Back at the shelter, others have been gathering roots, berries, and herbs. Nothing is wasted. Every hand helps. Even the kids learn by watching, then doing. Later, while the meat roasts, you fix your tools. Trade a joke. Share a story about the time you almost got trampled. The old ones laugh. They've seen worse. And then you rest, not because it's scheduled, because it's needed. You sit beside someone you trust. Feel the heat of the fire on your face. You listen to a bone flute soft tune, maybe even hum along. Evening falls, shadows stretch. The tribe gathers tight. Someone tells a story, part memory, part myth, of a cave spirit, of a lost hunt, of a thunder god. The kids listen with wide eyes. So do the adults, because stories aren't just for entertainment. They teach, they warn, they preserve. You sleep close to others, safe, full, connected. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. Now pause, think about that life. Not rushed, not commodified, number 9 to 5. No notifications, just Earth tribe. And time. Neanderthals weren't less evolved. They were deeply present. Their days were carved by necessity. Yes, but also by a deep understanding of balance. Hunt, heal, rest, repeat. They didn't live for luxury. They lived for each other. And maybe, just maybe, that made their world more human than ours. Imagine being born into a world of cold winds, predator tracks, and ancient trees. There are no lullabies playing from a baby monitor, no cribs, no cartoons, just the rhythm of the wild. And the heartbeat of your people. That's where a Neanderthal child opened their eyes. Not into safety, but into rawness. But here's the twist most people miss. That world didn't lack love. It pulsed with it, quiet, fierce, and deeply present. It starts at birth. The tribe gathers when a baby arrives. There's no hospital, no white coats, but there's ritual. Hands that have delivered life before, eyes that have seen the line between breath and silence, and arms ready to receive another soul. Into the fold, mothers weren't alone. Other women, sisters, elders, even teenage girls helped care for the newborn. It wasn't just a family thing. It was a tribal responsibility. The child didn't belong to just one person. They belonged to everyone. Childhood, it wasn't passive. There was no sit and wait phase. By age 3, they were watching spear making. By 5, they could identify which plants healed and which ones killed. By 7, they were walking miles through frost-covered terrain. With the hunters, not for fun but to learn. But it wasn't cruel, it was empowerment. Instead of shielding kids from the world, Neanderthals invited them into it, and kids rose to it. They played, of course. Games with bones, chases through trees, mimic hunts, but every moment carried a thread of preparation. They weren't being babysat. They were being shaped and disciplined. Forget the image of brute force. Neanderthal tribes likely relied on modeling, not punishment. Children watched, and they copied what they saw. You didn't need to yell at a child who saw your scars. They understood consequences by watching your limp, by hearing your stories around the fire. Respect wasn't demanded. It was earned and passed down. Now let's talk about values. Modern parenting pushes independence. Neanderthal parenting taught interdependence. You matter, yes, but only because the tribe matters more. A kid didn't grow up wondering who had their back. They felt it every single day in shared meals and group warmth and unspoken protection. That kind of emotional safety, it's something even we crave now. And here's something wild: science backs a lot of this up. Fossil evidence shows Neanderthal children were well cared for. Their remains are often found in proper burials, positioned gently, sometimes even buried with flowers or tools. Not tossed, not forgotten, honored. Which means they weren't just surviving, they were valued. So ask yourself, what kind of future gets raised in that world? One where children don't grow up scrolling, comparing, isolating, but running, building, bonding, where they don't chase success, but purpose, where they don't learn through screens, but through scars and stories. We think we've evolved past them, but maybe they understood childhood better than we do, not as a waiting room for adulthood, but as the forge where the tribe's soul is molded. Next time you think of Neanderthals, don't picture grunts and growls. Picture a child by the fire learning how to shape flint by watching their mother's hands. A boy tracing animal tracks beside his father. A girl whispering a bedtime myth to her younger sibling. They weren't raising kids to fit into a system. They were raising kids to carry a world. Close your eyes for a second. Now imagine living in a world where no one texts, no one tweets, and no one calls. There are no lectures, no bedtime stories, no gossip sessions, no texting through feelings, no hiding behind small talk. If you didn't communicate clearly through every motion, sound, and stare, you were out of sync, and in a survival-based world, out of sync meant dead. Think about what that does to your tribe. You become hyper-aware of one another. Every emotion becomes a shared experience. Empathy isn't optional, it's your lifeline. Neanderthal communication wasn't just practical, it was deeply emotional. Now flip that to our world today. We ghost, we misread texts, we say, "I'm fine," when we're falling apart. We've mastered the art of hiding, but Neanderthals, they had to be real. There was no emoji for fear, no meme for grief, only looks, hands, presence, and that kind of raw honesty that breeds a bond modern society barely understands. Some scientists believe they sang, not words but melodic calls used to calm children or guide hunters in the mist. Some even think they danced, especially during rituals. Why? Because movement, rhythm, and sound go beyond language. They don't just tell, they feel. So next time you think communication means talking, remember the tribe that said everything without saying a word, that lived in tune with each other, that didn't just survive storms, but faced them as one mind, many bodies. Maybe they didn't write poetry, but in the way they moved, in the way they looked at each other, they spoke volumes. Picture this: a cold cave wind howling outside, inside a fire, crackles casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. A group huddles around something silent, something still, a body wrapped in flowers, tucked in a shallow grave. Hands folded, eyes closed. This isn't just death. It's ritual, it's meaning, it's faith. Yeah, you read that right. Neanderthals might have believed in something beyond themselves. Not just food, not just survival, but spirits, afterlife, maybe even gods. And that changes everything. For years we painted them as brutes, hairy, grunting, beastly cavemen, but evidence keeps screaming louder they weren't savages. They felt, and more importantly, they wondered. Let's talk graves, real ones. Neanderthal burial sites have been found across Europe and the Middle East, bodies placed carefully, often in fetal positions, like they were returning to a womb. That's not random, that's symbolic. Some were found with animal bones, others with tools or flowers. Why bury someone with objects unless you believe they'd need them after? That's spiritual thinking. That's belief in something more. Here's the wild part. Homo sapiens didn't invent religion. We just refined it. Neanderthals, they laid the foundation. They didn't write holy texts or build temples, but they lit fires and looked up at the stars and maybe asked the same question we all ask. What happens when we die? Now imagine what faith looked like in their world. Not sermons, but silence. Not dogma, but symbols. A shared fire wasn't just heat, it was hope. A death wasn't just an ending, it was a transition. They may have believed the spirit left the body, or joined the wind, or returned to the earth that birthed them. And when they buried someone, it wasn't goodbye, it was see you beyond the ice. And here's where it gets even deeper. Some skulls show signs of injuries that healed serious ones, which means the wounded were cared for, not abandoned, not left behind. That's not instinct, that's compassion. And where there's compassion, there's belief in value, in meaning, in soul. Let's flip the lens. We modern humans created gods in our image. What if Neanderthals didn't? What if their faith wasn't about control, but about connection to nature, to the tribe, to the spirits they felt in the thunder and the hunt? Their gods might not have had names, but they had presence. Now imagine a world ruled by them. Not churches and cathedrals, but sacred forests. Not scriptures, but symbols passed from hand to hand, story to story, rituals built around firelight, not fear. Faith without force, spirituality that's felt, not forced. And maybe, just maybe, if they had inherited the earth, we'd all believe in a little less heaven and a lot more harmony. Let's kill the stereotype. No, Neanderthals weren't just smashing rocks and chasing mammoths like headless berserkers. They were tactical, they were methodical, they were brilliantly brutal in their own quiet way. Imagine this. You're deep in a forest. Snow's falling, visibility's low, then crack. You fall into a pit, sharpened stakes tear into your legs, and before you can scream, a spear is in your chest. You just met a Neanderthal hunting trap. This wasn't just luck or brute force, this was design. These people didn't rely on chance, they engineered outcomes. Their tools deadly simple, their tactics next level smart. Start with the tools. Stone flakes sharper than surgical scalpels. Wooden spears hardened in fire thrown with terrifying precision. Hand axes, scrapers, awls, all handcrafted, not hacked together. These weren't caveman toys. They were custom-built solutions for real-world problems. One tool, many uses, maximum efficiency. But tools are only half the picture. The real magic, how they used them. Neanderthals hunted in coordinated groups. They didn't chase prey. They ambushed it, surrounded it, cornered it, brought it down with brutal timing. Some studies suggest they drove animals off cliffs, used natural geography like chess pieces. They didn't fight nature, they played it. And think about this, they hunted massive beasts, woolly rhinos, giant elk, even mammoths with no guns, no horses, no armor. Just teamwork, timing, and nerve. That takes more than muscle, it takes mental planning. Here's something crazy, they weren't just tool users. They were tool teachers, skills passed down across generations, father to son, elder to youth. That means culture. That means memory. They weren't improvising, they were perfecting. Now picture a world where they survived and dominated. What would war look like in a Neanderthal world? No drones, no tech warfare, but traps in forests, hit-and-run raids, stone fortresses carved into cliffs. A world where battles are brutal, intimate, and bloody, where every warrior is also a craftsman. Every tribe has its own signature weapons and tactics, like samurais with spears and stones. And here's the twist, their slower evolution may have made them more patient. Where Homo sapiens rushed toward tech and conquest, Neanderthals may have focused inward, refining what they had, perfecting survival over ambition. They didn't build empires. They built endurance, and if they ruled the earth, the world wouldn't be faster, it'd be smarter in a primal way, fewer gadgets, more grit. We think intelligence is about microchips and coding. But try surviving a winter without electricity. Try feeding your tribe when mammoths vanish. Neanderthals did that. Over and over again. They weren't dumb. They were disciplined, and in there. World success wasn't about dominance. It was about adaptation. So if they had won, maybe we'd live in smaller tribes, more in tune with the land. With handmade tools passed down like heirlooms, we wouldn't fear the wilderness, we'd understand it. And in that world, the sharpest weapon wouldn't be a gun or a missile. It'd be a stone flake shaped with care, wielded with wisdom. Now picture this. You're walking through a dense, misty valley. Everything's quiet, eerily quiet. No voices. No chatter, no human noise. Just the soft crunch of feet on frost and the low hum of wind through pine. You turn to the Neanderthal beside you. He doesn't speak. He just looks, eyes intense, unreadable. And somehow you understand a nod, a hand gesture. The tilt of his head. That's all it takes. You follow his lead, silent as a shadow into the unknown. Now ask yourself, what if words never existed? What if the world's dominant species never talked like us? Neanderthals might have been silent hunters. But their silence wasn't emptiness. It was strategy. We think language is the crown jewel of human evolution, but Neanderthals may have taken a different route, one built on instinct, subtlety, and powerful nonverbal cues. They probably made sounds. Grunts, hums, maybe even names, but full-blown speech like ours. There's still debate. Some scientists say they lacked the vocal anatomy. Others argue they had it, but didn't need it. Why speak when you can read the world? Think about it. They lived in tight-knit groups. They hunted shoulder to shoulder. They didn't need long speeches. They needed sync, a glance, a motion, a shared rhythm. That's what made them deadly. Imagine an entire civilization built not on words, but on awareness. No gossip, no lies, no politics as we know it. Just truth, action, and clarity. You don't say what you mean, you show it. Every emotion is in your face. Every decision is made as a unit. Trust isn't verbal, it's earned. Now push that forward. A world ruled by Neanderthals could have rewritten communication entirely. Maybe. Language would have evolved through rhythm like drumming patterns across long distances. Maybe their songs would be guttural, primal pulses of emotion, less poetry, more raw truth. Or maybe they'd invent tools to replace language, symbols etched in stone. Gesture systems so refined, it'd make sign language look like child's play. In a Neanderthal-led world, storytelling wouldn't happen around a fire with words. It'd happen through action, through dance, through battle reenactments, through paintings on cave walls, so detailed they felt alive. No speeches, just stories carved into the earth. And here's the kicker, without spoken language would lies even exist? Words are how we manipulate, control, distract. Without them, deception would be harder. Society might be simpler, more direct. No politics, no spin. Just survival and truth told with eyes, not mouths. But don't mistake silence for weakness. Neanderthals weren't mute. They were minimalists. Why waste breath when you can speak through action? Maybe in their world, every sound matters. Every grunt is a decision. Every silence is a warning. That kind of world. Brutal, beautiful, and deeply real. If we had vanished and they had risen, maybe Earth wouldn't be full of noise and nonsense. Maybe it'd be quieter, more deliberate, more connected, a place where meaning doesn't come from what you say, but how well you listen. Before nations, before flags, before kings, queens, and borders. There were tribes, and in a Neanderthal world, that's all there ever would have been. Forget skyscrapers and sprawling cities. This world is built around fires and faces. Small, fierce bands, 10, maybe 15 members huddled together in icy caves or dense forest clearings, each one bound not by politics or power, but by something far deeper: survival. Let's break this down. Neanderthals didn't operate on ambition. They weren't trying to build empires. They were trying to stay alive, and that made their tribes tighter than any modern family you've ever seen. These weren't casual relationships, they were lifelines. You hunted together, ate together, slept shoulder to shoulder, bones against cold stone, and when one of you fell, whether from injury, starvation, or frostbite, the whole tribe felt it. They found Neanderthal remains showing signs of injuries that should have killed them, but didn't. Why? Because someone took care of them, fed them, protected them, carried them when they couldn't walk. That's not animal instinct, that's devotion. Now imagine this on a global scale. A world where tribal loyalty wasn't just important, it was the only thing that mattered. Every tribe is its own heartbeat, its own rhythm, its own tiny universe of stories, bonds, and rules. There's no such thing as every man for himself, because alone you die. Now let's push that further. What does a Neanderthal society look like? No central government, no elections, no law books, justice happens face to face. Break trust, you're out. And in a world this harsh, exile is a death sentence. There's no hiding behind lies or loopholes. You either contribute to the tribe, or you leave. And here's the kicker. There's no leader in the way we think of it. Leadership is earned daily, visibly. Who tracks best? Who fights hardest? Who makes fire when the world turns to ice? That's your leader until they falter. Now picture childhood in this world. There's no school, no grades. The entire tribe raises you. You learn to track animals before you can pronounce your own name. You skin your first kill before you lose your first tooth. And your bedtime story, it's not a fairy tale. It's the tale of the last hunt. The one where your uncle almost died saving your mother. The one you'll one day relive with your own hands. And the emotional core of it all, fire. Every tribe's fire was sacred. It was warmth, light, safety. Lose your fire and the cold will take you. Keep it burning and your people live another day. That fire, it wasn't just flames, it was hope. The tribe danced around it, told stories to it, cried beside it, made decisions by it. It was memory, it was survival, it was everything. If Neanderthals had ruled, this tribal system wouldn't be primitive, it would be perfected. Each tribe like a family, each bond sacred, and betrayal unthinkable. It's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the loyal. So ask yourself, would our modern chaos, our noise, our ego, our ambition survive in a world like this? Or would we finally learn to live for more than just ourselves? Let's kill the lie right now. Neanderthals weren't grunting brutes, smashing rocks together hoping for magic. They were engineers, tinkerers, minds wired for precision. Not the kind that dreamed of space rockets, but the kind that made survival an art. Because when every day is a battle against cold, hunger, and predators, you don't invent for comfort, you invent for life. Picture this: a Neanderthal crouches by a riverside. In his hand, a chunk of flint. Not just any flint, he's chosen it for its grain, its shape, its break pattern. He lifts a hammerstone and strikes with just enough force. Crack, a shard falls away razor sharp. He rotates, strikes again. Within minutes, he's crafted a spearhead so lethal it could pierce hide in one shot. That's not luck, that's craftsmanship. These weren't random swings, they followed a technique. A method passed down, refined, remembered. Neanderthals had tech, just not the kind that glows. Let's talk fire. They didn't stumble into it, they mastered it. Evidence shows they could start fires on their own using pyrite and flint to generate sparks, not waiting on lightning or lava, creating warmth, light, and cooking power on demand. In the Ice Age, that's the equivalent of inventing electricity, and they didn't stop there. They tanned hides using brain matter, created complex bone tools, used adhesives like birch pitch to attach flint points to wooden shafts. Yes, glue, made from tree resin, by heating bark without burning it, inside pits covered with stone. That's chemical engineering from brains that weren't dumb, just different. Now pause and ask, what would have happened if that innovation kept going? What would their version of the wheel look like? Or navigation or architecture? Would they build cities carved into mountain walls, more fortress than skyline? Would their version of communication be carved into stone in rhythmic, symbolic pulses, half music, half message? Neanderthal tech wouldn't be about speed or scale. It would be about durability, simplicity, connection to nature. They didn't use tools to dominate the earth. They used them to exist with it. Let's not forget their aesthetic. These weren't just functional beings. They had style. They wore pendants made of animal teeth, dyed their bodies with red ochre, some even buried there. Dead with flowers and tools. You don't decorate yourself unless you care how you look. You don't mourn the dead unless you feel something deeper than instinct. That's soul. That's design. That's culture. Now flip the lens. What if our modern tech had followed their trajectory? Maybe we'd have tools that biodegrade after a month. Maybe our devices would run on heat, wind, or friction. No batteries, no waste. Maybe innovation would mean harmony, not just progress. A world without noise, without wires, without pollution, still advanced, still capable, but with every invention pulled from the earth, not extracted violently from it. Neanderthals weren't behind us. They were just going a different direction, slower, smarter, closer to the ground. So next time someone calls them cavemen, just remember they were doing brain surgery with stone knives. While we're still figuring out how to stop melting the planet, let's face it, we live in a world ruled by words, tweets, text, speeches, pitches, nonstop noise. But what if that never happened? What if the dominant species on Earth, the Neanderthals, didn't speak like us? What if their idea of communication was something deeper, something primal? Because here's the thing: Neanderthals may not have had full-blown language like Homo sapiens, but they still connected. They still understood each other, and they might have done it without ever saying a word. Let's rewind. Their anatomy tells us something crucial. Neanderthals had a hyoid bone just like us, that tiny horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat. It helps us speak. Their brains had the Broca's area, the region tied to speech. They could probably produce sounds, rhythms, maybe even some structured language. But would they have chosen to? Maybe not, because Neanderthal life didn't revolve around storytelling. It revolved around action. You didn't need to describe a mammoth when you could just point, grunt, and hunt. You didn't need poetry to express grief. You sat beside the dead and laid flowers by their bones. Language wasn't performance, it was utility, and silence might have been sacred. Now imagine a world shaped by nonverbal communication. A society that runs on gestures, touch, posture, and eye contact. Where a raised eyebrow says more than a paragraph. Where body movement tells the truth. You can't lie about. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. We still do this today. You feel a vibe before you hear a word. You know when someone's lying, just by how they stand. Now crank that up to 100. Make it the foundation of civilization. That's the Neanderthal world. Imagine councils held in complete silence, every leader reading the others by breath, muscle tension, the flick of a hand. A single nod deciding war or peace. Imagine parenting through mimicry, not lecture, learning by watching, absorbing through experience, not explanation. Imagine intimacy defined not by sweet nothings, but by shared warmth, touch, presence. A world where you don't talk about love, you just live it in art. Now, that's where it gets wild. Without language, art becomes the main storyteller. Paintings on cave walls weren't decoration. They were communication, lessons, memories, warnings, rituals. One symbol repeated in red ochre could carry generations of meaning, like ancient hashtags etched in stone. Every mark a message, every symbol a sentence, not spoken, not heard, felt. Now let's bring it home. What if that became the dominant culture? Would we still need keyboards? Would we still write books? Would we still trust words at all? Or would we live slower, listen harder, feel deeper? Would we finally learn how to say everything without saying anything? Maybe Neanderthals didn't talk the way we do, but that doesn't mean they were silent. Maybe they just didn't need language to connect, and if they'd survived, maybe neither would we. Forget lullabies, forget playgrounds, forget picture books and sippy cups in a Neanderthal world. Childhood wasn't a safe bubble. It was a training ground. The moment you were born, you weren't just a baby. You were Fireburn, a future hunter, a future protector, a future survivor. And every breath you took came with one lesson: adapt or disappear. Let's paint the scene. A Neanderthal mother sits in a shallow cave, her arms wrapped around. Thick-shouldered toddler, not a lot of words, no baby talk, just silence. Warmth, presence, because parenting wasn't about coddling, it was about modeling. The child watched every move. How she cracked bones for marrow, how she shaped flint into blades, how she read the wind before a hunt. Neanderthal kids didn't learn from being told. They learned from being there, up close, all in, hands-on. By age 4, you knew how to spot fresh tracks in snow. By 6, you could skin a rabbit. By 10, you were part of the hunt. Not because it was cruel, because it was crucial. There were no second chances out there. No maybe later. No comfort zones. Everything you did, everything you learned, it mattered. And it didn't come with applause, success, survival, failure, death. But here's the wild part: Neanderthal parents still loved deeply. We found tiny skeletons buried with care, tucked with bones, flowers, even tools. Proof they mourned, they remembered, they honored their young. This wasn't a cold-hearted species. This was a species wired to protect what mattered most: family, tribe, future. So what did a Neanderthal school look like? Not a room, not a teacher, not a blackboard. It was the forest, the fire pit, the storm. Every tree, every track, every scar on an elder's body told a story, and every child learned to read it. They learned rhythm from fire, coordination from climbing, leadership from the hunt, teamwork from dragging mammoth meat through snow. You didn't memorize facts, you embodied instinct. Now flip the lens. What would it mean if this was the dominant parenting style? No lectures, no screens, no rewards for doing the bare minimum. Just raw, natural learning. By doing, by watching, by failing forward. It might sound harsh, but it also sounds honest, because in a Neanderthal world, you didn't grow up trying to find yourself. You became yourself through struggle, strength, and shared firelight. So here's the real question. Would kids today be stronger, more grounded, more connected if we raised them like the fireborn? No judges, no prisons, no written commandments carved into stone. And yet, Neanderthal societies didn't crumble into chaos. They thrived because where Homo sapiens built systems, Neanderthals built trust. Let's break it down. In our world, society leans on structure. Constitution, currency, courts, layers upon layers of control. But Neanderthals didn't need all that. Their world was simpler, but also deeper. They lived in tight-knit tribes, 10 to 15 members at most. Every face was familiar, every voice meant something. It was built for resilience, and if you weren't tough enough to make it, you didn't imagine their schools. Not 4 walls and chalkboards, but cliffs, rivers, blood trails in the snow. Lessons weren't spoken, they were shown. A father dragging a father, boar carcass showing where to strike, a mother sharpening stone blades, teaching grip and pressure, an elder pointing at moss on a tree, signaling direction. There were no grades, no exams. You passed by surviving the winter, you failed by not making it to spring. But don't confuse this with cruelty. This wasn't neglect, it was preparation. Every child was watched closely, not pampered, protected. If they stumbled, someone was there to lift them. If they cried, someone growled softly in comfort. If they bled, they were shown how to bleed less next time. Affection didn't come as kisses. It came as knowledge, as skill, as respect. And once you proved yourself, you weren't just the child. You became part of the tribe. There were rites of passage. A solo hunt at 13, climbing the cliff without help, fasting through snowstorms. These weren't ceremonies. They were transformations, one brutal challenge at a time. You stopped being someone who needed protection and became the one giving it. That's how warriors were born, not in war, in preparation. Every scar was a medal, every bruise a lesson, and every success a silent nod from the tribe that was better than any applause. Now imagine a Neanderthal child in this alternate timeline. Not a relic, not a fossil, a living force in a world where they thrive. That child grows up knowing only strength, purpose, and unity. No screens, no distractions, only instincts sharpened like obsidian blades. By the time they're 15, they've hunted, fought, lost, bled, and they've already buried someone they loved. But through it all, they've become something unshakable. Not just a survivor, a protector. This is where humanity took a different path, while Homo sapiens built cradles. And classrooms, Neanderthals built warriors, but not cold-hearted ones. Ones who felt deeply loved fiercely and knew what it meant to carry the tribe's legacy on their back. Not in words, in actions. Let's drop a myth real quick. Neanderthals weren't emotionless brutes. They didn't stomp around grunting, smashing things incapable of love. That's just bad history. And worse, imagination, because when scientists uncovered Neanderthal burial sites, they found something unexpected: flowers, charcoal, red ochre staining the soil like war paint, signs of care, of ritual, of grief. Why would a dumb caveman bury their dead with color and ceremony? Because love isn't a modern invention. It didn't come with poetry or Instagram captions. It was there in the dirt, in the silence, in the way they remembered. A Neanderthal didn't say "I love you." They showed it through protection, through food, through sitting by your side, even when your last breath rattled through the cold air. They didn't need language to understand loss. You could see it in their eyes. The way they'd sit for hours next to a fallen tribe member, unmoving, just being there. Even animals do that. Neanderthals did it with intention. That's not instinct. That's emotion. Imagine this. A child dies during a harsh winter. The tribe stops moving, just for a day. They dig a small grave beneath a birch tree. A mother lays a carved bone beside her child, something they used to play with. A father rubs red ochre into his hands and marks the child's forehead. No prayers, no gods, just love, raw and real. And then they move on because they had to. Not because they didn't care, but because survival didn't stop for sadness. That's the kind of emotional intelligence we don't talk about enough. Let's take it further: loyalty. These people weren't solo hunters running wild in the woods. They were tribes, families, packs. If someone broke a leg, they didn't leave them behind. They carried them, fed them, let them heal. There's fossil evidence, Neanderthals with severe injuries that healed over time. You don't get that unless someone waited for you, cared for you, chose not to leave you behind. That's not weakness, that's humanity. Real ancient primal connection. Even partnerships, yeah, romantic ones, weren't transactional. They were survival bonds. You didn't just find someone hot and swipe right. You shared warmth in winter. You hunted side by side. You raised children. Knowing one mistake could kill them all, you didn't choose partners lightly. Because they weren't just a match. They were the person who'd stand between you and death. That's love, Neanderthal style. Fierce, loyal. No time for games. And when someone was lost, they didn't move on. They carried that pain in the way they looked at the fire, in the way they fought harder, in the way they made sure no one else went hungry. Love was their language, loss was their scar, loyalty was their religion. So the next time you picture a Neanderthal, don't just see fur and fists. See the mother holding her newborn against her chest, humming something wordless. See the warrior who stays behind to save the injured elder. See the father carving a toy for his son out of bone. See the love. Because maybe they didn't write sonnets, but they lived them, one brutal, beautiful day at a time. Picture this. A fire crackles in the center of a narrow cave. The air is thick with smoke, the scent of roasted meat clinging to every surface. 12 figures huddle close. Not just for warmth, but trust. You don't sit by the fire unless you're part of the circle. Unless you've earned it. Unless you belong, because for Neanderthals' tribe wasn't just family, it was everything. They didn't live in sprawling cities. No nations, no passports, no bureaucracy. But don't mistake that for chaos. They had order. A system forged by necessity, not law. You contributed, you stayed, you slacked. You starved simple, brutal fare. And that tribe, that tight-knit group of 10 to 20 individuals, it was your safety net, your lifeline. Every face around that fire was someone who would bleed for you and expect the same in return. Now imagine a stranger wanders into the clearing, not part of the tribe, not familiar, not trusted. What do you think happens? You think they got a warm welcome. Not a chance. Neanderthals weren't diplomatic. They were defensive. Their world didn't leave room for let's talk this out. It was more like prove you're not a threat or leave. This wasn't cruelty. It was survival strategy, because one weak link, one bad decision, one outsider with the wrong intentions, and the entire tribe could be wiped out. So the tribe didn't take risks. They circled the wagons, closed the ranks, protected their own. But it wasn't just about keeping others out. It was also about pulling their people in. Within that tribe, you were everything to each other, hunted together, ate together, slept near each other in tight warmth, raised children as a collective, cared for the old, the wounded, the weak. They weren't soft, but they were loyal in a way modern society doesn't fully get anymore. If you were part of that circle, they'd fight to the death for you, and they often did. There's fossil evidence of brutal injuries, crushed skulls, broken arms that had healed. You don't survive those unless someone covered your shifts, hunted for you, kept predators at bay. That's tribe, that's ride or die. And the scary part, if Neanderthals were still around, their tribal loyalty would run deeper than ours ever could. Because we got distracted by cities, by tech, by noise. They stayed rooted in something primal, us versus the world. You see it even in how their brains were wired, larger regions, dedicated to sight and touch, hyper-aware of their environment, laser-focused on threats, quick to recognize friend or foe, no second chances, no gray areas, just trust or terror. But here's the wild twist in their brutal simplicity. There was also a strange kind of peace. You knew your place, you knew who had your back. You knew deep in your bones that you weren't alone. Isn't that what we're all chasing? That feeling of belonging. Neanderthals didn't need philosophy to get it. They lived it around that fire beneath that sky, with people who would fight and fall beside them. No contracts, no conditions, just blood-deep loyalty. Forget everything you learned in school about dumb cavemen. Neanderthals weren't brutes stumbling around with clubs and bad posture. They had brains, big ones. In fact, on average bigger than yours. Let that sink in. But hold up, more brain mass doesn't automatically mean higher IQ. It's how that brain was wired that tells the real story. So let's crack open the skull, not literally, and take a peek at what made the Neanderthal mind tick. Because their intelligence, it wasn't just different. It was purpose-built for survival in a world that wanted them dead. The visual dominators, Neanderthals, had massive visual processing regions. Why? Because in the icy, fog-choked forests of Ice Age Europe, seeing clearly could mean life or death. Where we evolved to read facial expressions and body language, Neanderthals evolved to scan landscapes, spot movement, track prey through the snow. Their eyes weren't just bigger. Their brains prioritized what they saw. Every flicker in the trees, every shadow in the cave processed fast, stored, remembered. Modern humans read vibes, Neanderthals read details. That's not lower intelligence. That's specialized genius. Tactical thinkers, not abstract dreamers. Now if you gave a Neanderthal a riddle or a crossword puzzle, they might stare at you blankly, but drop them in the wilderness with nothing but a stick and a spearhead. They'd outthink, outhunt, and outsurvive you every time. They were practical, strategic, no fluff, no overthinking. They knew how to build tools that could skin a mammoth with surgical precision. They figured out how to make adhesives from tree resin. And they timed their hunts based on migratory patterns. Try doing that with your podcast and oat milk. What about language? This is where it gets juicy. For years people said Neanderthals couldn't speak. But now that theory's crumbling, they had the hyoid bone, a tiny bone in the throat that's crucial for speech. Just like us, they had calm, emotionally wired. Here's something wild. Some parts of their brains were bigger in regions linked to empathy and emotional processing. That's right, the big scary cavemen might have been more in tune with each other than we are today. They cared for the sick, buried their dead, showed signs of mourning. That's not instinct, that's feeling deep, complex human emotion, the intelligence trade-off. Here's the kicker. They may have sacrificed some of the flexibility and abstract thinking Homo sapiens had for raw, real-world efficiency. While we were painting caves and dreaming up gods, they were focused on what's real. And in their world that made perfect sense. So were they less intelligent, not just different. Their minds were sculpted by cold, hunger, danger, and the need to stay alive one more day. Ours evolved for stories, symbols, strategy. Both are forms of brilliance. One builds pyramids, the other builds survival, and if the world had tilted just a little, it might be their kind. Of genius running the show today, we always paint Neanderthals as cold weather. Beasts, thick-skinned, hard-knuckled, and emotionally hollow. But what if that image is completely wrong? What if behind those deep-set eyes and broad foreheads lived dreamers, storytellers, souls? Because the more we dig literally, the more we realize Neanderthals may have had an inner world just as rich as ours. Cave art that wasn't ours. For decades, archaeologists stared at the same ancient paintings and assumed must have been Homo sapiens. But then Spain cave sites dated back over 64. 0 years, that's before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe and the caves were painted. Hand stencils, abstract shapes, pigments carefully chosen, red ochre smeared with purpose. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't natural wear, it was art, which meant it had to be Neanderthals. Boom. Everything changed. Fire feasts and feeling. Neanderthals weren't just making fires to cook meat. They were gathering around them. Evidence shows they lived in close-knit groups, not scattered loners but tight clans, with shared responsibilities. And you know what that means. Stories maybe not with words like ours, maybe more grunts, tones, expressions, but there were feelings, shared moments passed on. Every ember sparked a memory, every shadow flickered with meaning. They had rituals, they had rhythms, they had culture, just not as we define it. Burials and beyond. Let's talk about something sacred. Death. Neanderthals didn't just let their fallen rot. They buried them, laid them in shallow graves, in fetal positions, sometimes with tools, flowers, or animal bones nearby. That's not random, that's intention, that's symbolism. That's a belief in something more, maybe not heaven or gods, but definitely a sense of meaning beyond the now. Some even showed signs of tending to the elderly or injured, which means they loved, they remembered, they grieved, and grief is the most human thing. There is a mind wired for beauty. Now we know Neanderthals had the brain power, we've covered that. But the big twist, they had the emotional wiring too, that mix of empathy, memory, and sensory awareness. Perfect recipe for creativity. They could have appreciated a glowing sunset, or the echo of a howl through a canyon, or the weight of silence after a storm. They might not have painted the Mona Lisa, but they felt something deep in the bones, and maybe they expressed it in stone etchings, body paint, necklaces made from eagle claws. Not flashy, not polished, but powerful, connected to the wild, while Homo sapiens slowly pulled away from nature, building walls, writing rules. Neanderthals remained in sync with the earth. Their art raw, their tools functional and symbolic, their rituals rooted in the environment. No separation between man and nature. They were nature and they respected it. That connection wasn't a weakness, it was wisdom. So did Neanderthals dream. Maybe not of flying cars or interstellar travel, but they dreamed of safety, of belonging, of keeping the fire alive, of seeing the sun rise again after a brutal winter night. And in those dreams, they weren't so different from us after all. Imagine a world without elections. No campaign speeches, no televised debates, no broken promises wrapped in polished language. Now picture this: a world where leadership isn't earned with charm, it's proven through action. That's the world. Neanderthals would have built a society not led by ideologies, but instincts, strength with status. Let's get one thing straight: Neanderthals weren't savage brutes bashing each other for dominance. But make no mistake, strength mattered. Not just brute force, but resilience, endurance. The ability to protect, provide, and lead through survival. In a Neanderthal-led society, your role wouldn't come from a resume. It'd come from how you held your ground when the snow came in hard, how you hunted when mouths were starving, how you fought when danger crawled out of the dark. Leaders weren't voted in. They were followed naturally because people trusted the strongest hands and the calmest eyes. The tribe was everything. There was no individual success in their world. It wasn't about me. It was always about us. The tribe was family, shield, and soul, a tight circle where everyone pulled their weight and everyone mattered. You couldn't buy your way to the top. You had to earn your place every day through grit and loyalty. And if you betrayed the tribe, you weren't punished with prison, you were exiled alone. Cut off, the ultimate death sentence in a world where community meant survival. Rituals, respect, and raw authority. Their power structure wasn't chaos, it was primal order. There may have been a chief, but not the kind wearing gold or barking. Orders from a throne. The Neanderthal leader was the one who stood tallest in the storm, who bled first when wolves attacked, who shared food even when they were starving. They led not by dominance, but by devotion, and when they gathered by firelight. It wasn't to pass laws, it was to pass wisdom. Elders spoke, hunters listened, young ones learned through story, not textbooks. This was leadership that lived in bone, not on paper. Justice was swift and final. In a Neanderthal world you didn't have courts, you had consequence. If you stole from the tribe, if you hurt one of your own, justice wasn't slow, it was immediate. Maybe a scar, maybe a fight, maybe banishment, but it meant something, and everyone knew the rules. No corruption, no loopholes. Just clear boundaries, and honestly, it might have been more fair than the tangled systems we live under now. Hierarchy without cruelty. Here's the twist: despite their rugged toughness, Neanderthals didn't rule through fear, they showed signs of care. Elderly members were looked after, injured members weren't cast out, they were protected. That's not just strength, that's honor. Their tribes may have been simple by modern standards, but they were rooted in a code we've mostly forgotten. Stick together, stand for each other, survive as one. So what would governance look like in a Neanderthal-led Earth? No democracies, no dictatorships, just tribal units, each built on earned respect, shared hardship, and ancient unspoken laws. Wasn't taken, it was given to the ones who'd proven they could carry it. And maybe that kind of leadership, raw, real, and rooted in survival, is what we lost when we outlived them. Forget desks, forget whiteboards, forget sitting still for 8 hours a day being told what to think. In a Neanderthal-led world, education wouldn't look like school, it would look like life itself. Because to them learning wasn't separate from living, it was woven into every moment, learning by doing. Imagine this: a young Neanderthal wakes up before dawn. The air is crisp, the forest still half asleep, but his training has already begun. Not with a lecture, not with homework, with action. He watches the hunters prep their tools. He listens as the firekeeper shares what herbs helped heal last winter's fevers. He's learning constantly, silently, intuitively. Every cut of the stone, every track in the mud, every animal call in the distance. This wasn't knowledge from books, it was wisdom. Earned through repetition, and respect. Intelligence wasn't measured in numbers. There were no tests, no scores, no gold stars. But that doesn't mean Neanderthal children weren't smart. In fact, they were likely sharp in ways we can't even measure today. They learned how to read the clouds for storms, how to sense danger in silence, how to recognize edible plants from. But they weren't beasts. They were beings with questions, with fears, with rituals. And in this world where they won, they built a spiritual system just as powerful as ours, maybe even more rooted, more sacred, more in tune with the earth we've spent centuries ignoring. So if you died in a Neanderthal-led world, you wouldn't get a tombstone, you'd get a place among the trees. Your name wouldn't be carved in granite. It would be spoken in chants, burned into memory, passed down through fire and dream. And maybe, just maybe, that's a more powerful kind of immortality. Let's strip everything back. No wires, no glass screens, no neon lights flickering at midnight. Now picture a world where Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, took the reins of history. Would they build satellites and skyscrapers? Or would progress where fur, walk barefoot, and whisper through stone tools? Let's break it wide open. The tools tell a story. Here's the thing: Neanderthals did innovate, and they did it their way. They weren't just smashing rocks together. They engineered sophisticated spears with detachable tips. They created adhesives from birch bark, tar, yes, literal Neanderthal glue. They hunted in coordinated groups, tracking prey across vast landscapes with strategy, precision, and patience. That's not primitive, that's pragmatic genius. In their world, technology wasn't about flash, it was about function. If it didn't serve survival, It didn't survive. Now imagine that logic. Scaled across thousands of years, what kind of world would that create? Progress without pollution. Let's be honest, our version of advancement came with a price. Deforestation, plastic oceans, carbon clouds. But Neanderthal innovation, it was symbiotic. They worked with nature, not against it. So, in this alternate reality, cities wouldn't choke the skyline. They'd blend into it. Tree dwellings, underground lodges, cliffside sanctuaries, reinforced with bone and stone energy probably. Solar transport, maybe wind-powered gliders or tamed animal companions. Imagine a world where every tech upgrade actually improved the environment, not destroyed it. That's Neanderthal futurism. No obsession with speed. Here's a core difference. Between us and them, we rush. They endure. Homo sapiens built machines to go faster, farther. Now Neanderthals built tools to last. So would they ever invent smartphones? Probably not. But communication wouldn't be lost. It'd be deepened story. Circles, smoke signals, symbolic markings that evolved into an intricate form of language carved on trees, walls, and skin. A society not hyper-connected, but hyper-present. What about medicine? Don't think for a second they'd stay in the Stone Age. Forever, Neanderthals already used natural remedies, plants with anti-inflammatory properties, pain relievers, even rudimentary surgeries. Give them 0 years, you're looking at bioalchemy, medicine rooted in nature, not labs. Cures wouldn't come in pills. They'd come from rituals, herbs, energy practices tied to the seasons and spirit. Science, yes, but deeply woven into spirituality, no sterile. Hospitals, healing lodges, instead steam chants and stone-based. Diagnostics that feel like a mix of therapy and ancient magic. Their innovation would feel alive. Every tool they made had soul. Every material had meaning. So in this world, technology wouldn't be cold, robotic, or disposable. It'd be organic, bone-crafted instruments, living. Architecture, houses grown from trees, not built on top of them. Their eye wouldn't be artificial. It'd be ancestral wisdom passed down through ritual, not server farms. In fact, the highest form of Neanderthal technology might not be mechanical at all. It might be mental, telepathic style intuition. Deep instinct networks. A sixth sense sharpened by centuries of survival. So would they be advanced? Not in the way we define it, but maybe that's the point. We define advanced as speed, size, and software. They define it as balance, harmony, and longevity. So no, you wouldn't get an Apple Watch, you'd get a hand-carved time marker synced. With moon cycles and animal migrations, no Google Maps, but trails etched in bark, updated by every traveler who passed. No need to download information, just listen to the wind. The earth speaks. Neanderthals knew how to listen. This isn't primitive. It's a different kind of brilliance, and in their world, tech wouldn't separate us from nature. It'd bring us closer. That's not a downgrade. It might just be the upgrade we needed all along. Here's the moment we've been building towards, the end of the journey. We've ventured through time, questioning what would happen if Neanderthals had never vanished, if they had risen, not Homo sapiens. But before you close the book on this world we've crafted, I want you to pause, look around, and reflect on the bigger picture. Imagine it, a world where the humans in charge aren't us, but those strong, silent, and resilient Neanderthals. Their villages dot the landscape, trees and stone walls blending in harmony. The air is clean, the skies stretch wider because their cities are built with nature, not against it. No massive highways, no endless skyscrapers. Just simple, grounded homes and communities that feel like they were meant to exist here, not carve out a place. In this world, the noise of machines would be drowned out by the songs of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the crackling of fire. It's a slower world, sure, but more connected to each other, to the earth, to the cycles of life that have always been. Would you feel out of place in this world? Would you feel like something's missing? Maybe. But then again, maybe you'd finally belong now. Picture this, you've lived through their ways. You've seen how they take care of their land, how their communities function, how they make decisions not through algorithms or polls, but through wisdom, passed down from generations. It's a world where every action is deliberate, Every move made with purpose, no rush to improve. At all costs, no need to bulldoze for profit. No desire to expand at the expense of the world's well-being. Instead, every day is a measured step toward balance between humans, animals, and the environment. In this reality, progress doesn't mean bigger, faster, or more. It means deeper connection and understanding, and maybe, just maybe, it's a life worth living after all. What if they were us? Think back to your own world for a second. Could you imagine a life without the noise of constant digital upgrades, the pressure of needing more than what you have? Would it feel like a loss, or would you find peace in a quieter, more grounded existence? It's not hard to see why we've romanticized the idea of the past, a simpler time. A time of survival and strength where every moment mattered. So what does this mean for us? This isn't just a what-if story about the Neanderthals. It's a mirror. It's about questioning the world we live in, about asking whether we've been rushing toward something that's ultimately unsustainable. We've explored the idea that Neanderthals had a different path, one rooted in survival strength and symbiosis with nature. Their tech wasn't flashy or digital, it was intuitive, purposeful, and alive. And in a world that's often noisy, chaotic, and disconnected, maybe that's something worth considering. Maybe we can take a page from their book, not to live exactly as they did, but to learn from their wisdom, to slow down, to care for the land, to reconnect with the roots of humanity. So, here's the real question: what if we choose to live like Neanderthals? Sure, we're not going to go back to stone tools and fire pits. We're not suggesting you toss your smartphone. But think of the lessons we can carry forward. Embrace sustainability. Not just technology, build community, not just infrastructure. Find strength in unity, not in individualism. In the end, this world, our world, didn't play out the way we thought. Neanderthals didn't win, and Homo sapiens ruled the day, but the question lingers: if they had, would our world have been stronger, simpler, better? Maybe the real victory is learning from them. Maybe it's not about who won, but what we choose to take forward. So here we are, a final thought before we part. The story of Neanderthals is more than just a glimpse into the past. It's a mirror to the future. And while we can't rewrite history, we can certainly change how we live tomorrow. And in that world, maybe we'll find a balance between progress and nature, between innovation and preservation. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to rethink the way we've been doing things. So take a moment to think about it. What's your choice? How will you shape the world moving forward? And just like that, the story of the Neanderthals lives on, but now it's yours to carry forward. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride. This wasn't just a history lesson, it was a journey through possibilities. The story might be over, but the questions we've asked aren't. Keep thinking, keep dreaming, and remember, the world you live in is always in your hands.